I love pulling off the concrete forms. It's always exciting seeing how the pour turned out. These two footings I give maybe a C to a C plus for a grade. There's some cavities in the bottom of the upper part that didn't quite get filled in, which I was disappointed to see, but I don't think it's going to affect the integrity of them too much. They're still pretty overkill and should be nice and strong to support the deck up above it. And I thought I would go back in and patch the holes in with some mortar. Drake and I had a nice little bonfire that night, burning the wood from the forms. The two 4-inch by 4-inch metal posts that'll support the deck need to be 26 feet long, and I could only get these posts in 20-foot lengths, so I had to get 3 of them, and one of them will get cut in half, and each piece will be welded onto the other 2. I decided to go with 1/4 inch thickness, which means these things are really heavy. They also took a while to cut on the bandsaw, and while I was waiting for them to cut, Drake and I developed a new game. The game's called Throw the Ball Down the Tube and Fetch it on the other side. It was a real fun one. The inside diameter of the tubing is 3.5 inches, which happened to be the same size of the metal I set in the concrete. And I had enough left over from that to cut a couple pieces that I can insert into both sides of the tubing I'm welding together, which I thought would really give it some strength and make sure it stays nice and straight and lined up as I weld it. I marked the location of the welding seam on the inside of the bigger tubing, and then transferred this onto smaller tubing. I cut a notch in it using an angle grinder. Didn't have to be too deep of a notch, about 1/8 of an inch. And then I tapped it halfway into the bigger tubing. I wanted to use a couple plug welds to hold the insert in place, which gave me a really good excuse to bust out my new mag drill. I've drilled so many holes in metal using just a hand drill, and sometimes those were big holes, and sometimes they were thick pieces of metal. So this was the ultimate luxury, having a mag drill now. I drilled all the way through the outer piece, and then about halfway through the inside piece before plug welding it. Using a flat disc, I ground it smooth. I grabbed the full 20-foot piece and positioned it with one side against the wall so I could hammer in the extension. It was a nice tight fit, which gave me some confidence it would be a strong joint between the two pieces. Thought it was oddly satisfying seeing those two sides come together like that. I notched out a groove all the way around the seam on all sides of the post, which I could come back in and fill up with a weld bead. And then I adjusted the hoist so it was supporting the piece perfectly flat across the table. Then I clamped it down to the table, and I also clamped a piece to the backside of it to hold it straight in that direction as well. After welding all 4 sides, I used the flat disc to blend the two pieces together. I'm hoping that after I put some paint on this, that it'll be really hard to tell this was originally 2 pieces. And lastly, I plug welded the bottom side as well. These were two long, heavy pieces of metal, and I really wasn't looking forward to getting them upright on top of the forms. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it yet, but that's future Justin's problem. I'll leave it for him to figure out. I hauled the supports down to my barn using the farm truck, and then I gave them a couple coats of paint. I'll have to touch them up again after welding more things onto them, but I didn't want the bare metal going out in the rain. I had the whole weekend free, and I was really excited to do nothing but work on the barn. I was a little bummed when I woke up Saturday morning and it was snowing outside. I thought it might hamper my deck plans a little bit, but I just decided to get out there and see what I could get done anyways. It actually ended up being a really fun day. We got about 6 inches, and watching the snow fall while I was out there working on the barn made for some good memories. And as long as I could keep my hands working, it wasn't too bad. Sorry, Mr. Birdie, but this beam's coming down, and I gotta move your nest. Now that I had the old 2x6s cut out and removed, I could work on putting the new 6x6 pressure treated beam in place. I was kind of making up all this stuff as I went. I didn't have too much of a game plan as far as how I was going to get these big long pieces of wood and metal into place, and even more importantly, hold them there. I slowly got this wooden beam as close to in place as I could get it with the skid steer. And then lined it up and pushed it against the building by hand. My idea was to raise one end up as high as I can get it and then hold it in place with a strap. And then I can go to the other end and raise it hopefully just a little bit higher and then tighten that end down with a strap. After doing this a couple times, I got the beam up against the rafters in place and then put a couple more straps around it just to hold it tight and make sure it stays up there. Now that I had the wooden beam in place, I can move on to the metal posts. I needed to pull one piece of the tin roofing off. I'll have to cut a hole in this roofing and put it back in place after I get the post up. Drake was a little worried about me, and probably rightfully so. I know it wasn't the smartest being up on the roof in these conditions. Oh, he's not worried about me. He just wants his ball. Once I had all the roofing nails out, I could lift off the piece of tin, and I set it aside. Alright, got that easy part done. Now it's the hard part. Past Justin was a real jerk, leaving me the responsibility of figuring out how to get these things upright. I dropped the forks off the skid steer, and then tilted the front all the way down until it was flat on the post, and then I used the strap at the top and bottom as tight as I can get them to support the weight of the beam. I nervously tipped back the front of the skid steer, raising up the post. I was super nervous one of these straps was going to break and the whole thing was going to come crashing down onto my new doors that I just finished. I took Drake inside the house for this. I definitely didn't want him out here while I was moving these posts around. It felt really good getting that bottom set in. I undid the bottom strap, and then this let me nudge it left or right, getting it level. We were starting to get freezing rain now, and I didn't see that the camera lens was frozen up. Well, I got one in place, and it went pretty smoothly. I threw a strap around the top, pinning it to the wooden beam. And then I could back away and go grab the second post, which was probably going to be quite a bit harder to get into place. This shot makes me wish you all were watching with your red and blue 3D glasses. Would have been a good one for that. So on the second one, I was hoping I could just come in with the post tilted and it would give me enough clearance to get underneath the gutter and the fascia board. But after getting it in place, I realized this wasn't going to work. I thought I might have a little more room if I came in from the side, so I decided to give that a shot. If this didn't work, I really didn't know what I was going to do. Probably hire a helicopter to airlift it into place. I had to bend the roofing a little to get it underneath the metal post, but just barely fit. And then I could slowly come forward as I also tilted it up at the same time. It was also a really tight fit against the concrete footing, so I had to keep an eye on that as well. I eventually got it upright and over the top of the footing. But since I had come in at an angle this time, it wasn't going to sit down into the cup on top of the footing. I loosened both the straps up a little bit, and then I could get my big pipe wrench on it and turn it just enough to get it to slide into the cup. Another strap up top to hold this one in place as well. So now I have a 26-foot long wooden beam and two 400-pound metal posts, all being held in place by some straps, which is probably not the best long-term means of attachment. I should probably do something about that.